Please remember to like, subscribe and comment, as we love to hear back from our viewers. Also, if you enjoy our videos, please consider becoming a patron of our show through Patreon and or GoFundMe. Links are listed below the video in the description. From the deepest, darkest recesses of Dangerous Nerds headquarters, Keith Moncrief and Gerry Kissell.
Hey everyone, I'm Keith.
This is Gerry.
And you found Pop Culture Minefield. Well, this week, lot of big
This
stories.
week,
Yeah, well,
today,
I should say
we're doing a daily format thing. He hasn't gotten used to it
Yeah, I
yet.
know this.
It's the whole fall back, spring forward thing. Confuses him.
Jump to
This
the side.
week,
Okay. James McAvoy, who was doing a video on his Instagram account, answered a question, a fan question. Someone decided to ask who he would prefer to play in a DC film. And he revealed that he'd like to be the Riddler for the new Batman movie.
and I would like to see that.
That would be kind of cool. Now he expressed that with the caveat, you know, if it turns out that he won't have a job, which he doesn't. I don't know
Yeah,
why.
they're not going to bring in. Disney bought Fox.
Yeah,
It's that simple. They bought it. They have everything in their catalog, and that's a lot, dude. They are actually the oldest still in existent film studio.
yeah.
They've been around since
Well,
the start of the silent film era.
But they sold off parts. A good majority of their physical studio got sold off because of Cleopatra. They had to cover the bills for making that.
Yeah, if you don't know the history of that film.
No.
Many careers ended that day. Well, it led to the Alan Ladd situation going off and making Ladd Company.
Yep.
And because
that eventually affected another movie.
it became something called Star Combat, Star Wars.
Yeah, that's it. Anyway, having James McAvoy be the Riddler, I mean, come on. I think he can do anything. After really Split and Glass, he's pretty much shown a range.
Yeah, and I brought up, there was this film I saw, and it's a film that you can only watch one time because it's just so dark. It's called Filth. And I was blown away at how good he was in this movie. And I learned that I like Scottish productions. And I began watching a lot of Scottish TV shows because of that movie. But it was really good, and it impressed upon me just how good an actor he really was. And I mean, we all got to know him because he was in, like you said, Wanted.
Wanted was really good.
Great film. Surprised we never got a sequel to that.
Chronicles of Narnia, the first one.
That's right, and he was Prince Caspian.
No.
Who's
He's Mr. Tumnus.
Oh, the Luke playing
yes.
character. That's right, that was him. Oh
Yeah.
my God. I've only seen the first one. I took my daughter to see it, and the rest of the time she went with friends to see the other films because I wasn't interested. Not that I don't appreciate the Narnia books, the Chronicles of Narnia. I was a Lord of the Rings fan, and I just never connected with Narnia. Even though I knew it, read it, all that stuff, I was just like,
It was not your guy.
It's just not the Hobbits.
Well, you know, that's how certain people look at, something like Buffy, and a lot of them didn't really seem to mind, or at least take to the spinoff series, Angel. But this week, David Boreanaz was on the talk show called The Talk,
The Talk?
Yeah, I know.
Who came up with that name?
And he had something to say that got a lot of Buffy fans kind of excited. So basically, he said, we're coming up on 20 years, and I mean, that's amazing to have been blessed with a show like that. And that's where I really started my gig, this acting world, said Boreanaz, where he went on to basically intone that we might see a kind of reunion associated with the show Angel, which is kind of cool. Now, again, 20 years, which still blows my mind that it's been 20 years since the pilot episode. Angel had a lot going for it, and while it did not last as long on television as Buffy, I still think it was a really, really good series.
And they had a really dedicated fan base. And,
yes.
And it led to, because some of the work that I did early on for IDW was dealing with the fact that they either had Angel or they had the other show, because Dark Horse got 2 of the properties.
Yeah.
And IDW got 1 of the properties from the Buffy series. Mm-hmm. And I got to do the first job I ever had for IDW was not as a comic artist, but as the director and animator for their trailers, for their comic titles.
Yeah.
And I got to do one of the, it wasn't Angel, what's the other character's name with the blonde hair? Spike. Yeah. It was the Spike comic. And I enjoyed Spike too. I enjoyed all of that stuff. And the reason why these comics lasted and kept going is because those dedicated fans to those shows. And that's why I've always been surprised that the shows ever ended.
Yeah. Because
they had such a solid fan base.
Well, it's Fox. Of course.
Yeah, Fox is now that they're owned by Disney, I'm hoping we're going to see a little better dedication to the programming. Because Fox has been notorious for decades.
Yes.
I mean, it started with the beginning of Fox when George C. Scott was given the president.
Yeah.
And that TV series where he played the president.
Yeah.
And in order to get him over, they wooed him. They said, we will back you. We'll give you everything you want. This show is going to get all of our attention. And then he did the series and they canceled it almost immediately. And broke every promise they made with George. Which is why George, after that, never worked with Fox ever again. Refused to. Wasn't like they didn't want to offer him work.
Yeah.
He just simply would never work with them again.
Yeah.
Him and Trish Vanderveer held a grudge against 20th Century Fox for that stuff. So they've been doing it since Fox started as a network.
Wow.
Doing that to people. And they did it through the 90s. Millennium should have never been canceled.
Yeah.
The shifting around of even the X-Files.
Well, even how they handled Firefly.
Oh my God! Firefly
showing it out of
the
order.
Greatest betrayals by Fox.
Yeah, that was the first show where you realized that they were showing the episodes out of order.
Order.
The first episode they ended up showing was actually the 3rd episode that was meant to be shown, and that wasn't the only sci-fi show they did that to. But I mean,
and the goofy part is some shows you can get away with that, like with Star Trek.
Yeah.
Because they don't. The original series didn't have an overflowing arc, whereas Firefly did. And so when you take the episodes out of context, it can get kind of confusing, and so people were really confused by it. But they still had a dedicated fan base.
And the other show, Almost Human. Now, that show's only a few years old, but turns out that Fox ended up screwing that show up by pretty much showing almost every episode out of order.
Oh my God! So Disney bought Fox, and that's part of, I guess we should say something about that.
Yeah.
It's like your general reaction to it is, of course, from the executive business side.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on it?
My thought is it was going to happen. Fox was going to end up with someone because business-wise, money-wise, Fox has been basically losing money over time, and basically its shareholders it just was not a happy situation. You have the FX network, which is a part of,
and then
all
FXX.
This. Yeah. Disney has acquired all of that. Of course, they get the entire catalog.
They own Fox News now too.
No.
Was that separate?
No. Fox News and Fox Sports were taken out of the whole thing, so the Murdoch family still controls those and runs those separately. But everything that is not Fox News and not Fox Sports, everything else belongs to Disney.
Well, I think I think it's a good thing personally, because there is something about Disney that I will always say is a positive thing.
Yeah.
They know how to do business. They really do. Now, agreed, they tend to give a lot of rope to their sub companies to either pull themselves up with or to hang themselves with.
Yeah.
And we saw that with Kathleen Kennedy and Ruin Johnson. I keep saying Ruin Johnson. I can't seem to say his name correctly.
I will say this, though. Now that the deal has gone through,
Yeah.
I'm thinking one of the first really, really cool things that they could easily do is just in time for Episode 9 of Star Wars to go ahead and put the Fox fanfare at the beginning of the movie.
Bum, bum, bum.
It's something that a lot of Star Wars fans have been missing. If you grew up with the
It was
original
weird.
trilogy- Yeah.
It was weird not having it when I went to see Episode 7.
Yeah.
And Zoe and I are sitting there, and even she noticed it, even as a kid. She's like, how come this feels different? I said, because it doesn't have the Fox fanfare at the beginning. It was like, you got used to that, having, because as I recall, I think John Williams conducted the newer version of the Fox fanfare that we heard that went with Star Wars, because they did the full fanfare. Because that you don't see that very often. Usually for 20th Century Fox television and films, you get the truncated version, which is just the drums and da-da-da-da, and then it moves on. But for like Batman the TV series back in the 60s and for Star Wars, we got the full fanfare.
Yeah.
And I know that he also did the theme for Lad Company, which has its association, which we already mentioned, with 20th Century Fox.
Yep.
And I love that association with John Williams. I'm a John Williams fan.
Who isn't? But now that you've had
Danny Elfman.
now that we've had this entire thing happen, and we can look at all of this and everything that Disney now owns that used to belong to Fox. If you are a Buffy fan, this is nothing but positive news, because that means that things like the Buffy animated series that they originally had planned, to the point where they even had written an entire first season of episodes using the writers from the original series, had commitments from the entire cast, with the exception of Sarah Michelle Gellar, to do voices for it, and they even found a sound alike for her, and it got canceled at the last moment.
I'm wondering now, wow, you just triggered something. It's like, what effect is this going to have on the revival of Buffy?
I think there will be a revival, but not
with a new cast.
No.
With the original cast.
I'm thinking what they're going to do is they're going to have another series. Rather than remake Buffy, what they're going to do. Because
that was initially what I heard they were going to do.
That was what Fox was
Which I thought was a horrible idea.
They're going to just make another series set within that universe and allow the original actors to be a part of it, playing their original characters. Because when you look at what...
Older with their own kids going through stuff, sort of like what we talked about with Ted and
what you've done in the comics is you've had all
Bill and Ted.
These potentials, okay? So it's really just running it with all of the potential Slayers, or ones that are now Slayers, girls that can automatically be Slayers. So that you don't have this one at a time rule, you can have multiple Slayers. And that goes into what Joss Whedon had set up before the end of Buffy, before the end of the series. He had put out a comic book called Frey, which is about a futuristic vampire slayer in the far future where there are no vampires. And it was the first time you got to see...
He's sort of like the Maytag man, just sitting around not doing anything.
Maytag
never breaks down.
But because there are no vampires, she begins to... she figures out that vampires are coming back and humanity isn't ready. Nobody is expecting this. and she's the only one that can defend it, and she's the last Slayer. Okay? It's a really cool comic book. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it pretty much any place.
Yeah, I'm going to be checking it out.
Yeah, check it out.
Comixology, I'm sure it's on there.
Dark Horse, I think, had it originally. And it is a fun comic book. But Buffy's weapon that you saw in the final season, that weapon was originally envisioned in the comic book called Frey. That's the weapon that Frey is going to have in the future that Buffy grabbed and they made.
So now they have a chance to connect it and be Frey sort of be what happens after Buffy.
And basically, people like me were asking, well, how could you have an entire planet where there are no more vampires? Well, then you finally saw the final season of Buffy. If you increase the number of Slayers, there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
So it's a whole series, a whole universe of which Angel is a part of. It's gonna be all fine and fun. Just Joss is still
Here's
with
to
it.
that.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that about does it for this particular episode. But remember to stick around after this, after the credits. We have a video to show.
What?
A video.
Of what?
Return to Monster Island.
Oh, by Graham Nolan?
Yes.
Our good friend who gave our show its name?
I think that's the same one. I think it's the sequel to Monster Island.
Can you imagine it? Having the same name, but with the word return to. That Graham Nolan, he's so clever. Stick around, watch it after the credits, and I guess we'll see you on the next episode. For that, I'm Gary.
And I'm Keith.
And this is Pop Culture Minefield. Y'all come back now, you hear? Y'all come back now, you hear?
Hi comics and monster fans, welcome to the Return to Monster Island Kickstarter campaign. I'm Graham Nolan. You probably know my work from my years of working at Marvel and DC Comics. I'm the designer and co-creator of the Batman villain Bane. I've recently partnered with my friends at Ominous Press to bring you the 20th anniversary edition of Monster Island. And thanks to all of the backers that supported the project, it was a great success, and we can finally bring to you the long-awaited sequel, Return to Monster Island. It's been 20 years in the making, and I think everybody's been patient long enough. Return to Monster Island is the long-awaited sequel to my original story, Monster Island. It's been 20 years in the making. I've always wanted to do the sequel and the subsequent sequels. This was originally an idea that had 4 story parts, and this obviously is the first one. 2 years have passed since the original adventure, and our heroes, Mac and Duke, are called back to action. When the Monster Island shows up on the Navy radar screens above the Bering Sea, it's a race against time to get there before the Russians. A group of aliens has taken over the island, and our heroes have to set things right before the island disappears once more. New characters, new monsters, and new dangers await you on the Return to Monster Island. Some of the great rewards for this campaign include Return to Monster Island in full color, a colorized version of the original Monster Island, commission art done by me, and lots of other great stuff. Thank you for joining us for Return to Monster Island. I hope you'll consider pledging your support to this campaign. I know with your help it'll be a huge success.